Okay, I think we can get started. Before we start, I want to do a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Um, so the Temerty Center for AI Research and Education in Medicine at the University of Toronto, or T-CAIREM, has been made possible by the generous donation from the Temerty family. T-CAIREM is an interdepartmental center that serves as a focal point for collaboration between healthcare providers, trainees, researchers, computer scientists, engineers, and industry. Our goal is to transform health through AI. Um, and these are a couple of our resources here. We have the TCARM website. You can join the network using that QR code up there. We also have a learning hub, learning.tcarm.ai, where there's a lot of resources for clinicians, students, researchers, and educators looking to learn more about AI in medicine. So quick note to the attendees, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your questions for today's speaker, and they will address them during the discussion portion of the webinar. And so by attending the event, you are consenting to being photographed or recorded for non-commercial use by TCAREM. So I'll introduce our speaker today. Dr. Laura Rosella is the principal investigator and scientific director of the Population Health Analytics Lab. She's a full professor in the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, where she holds Canada Research Chair in Population Health Analytics. She's a member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, the Stephen Family Research Chair in Community Health at the Institute for Better Health, Trillium Health Partners, the education lead for the Temerty Center for Artificial Intelligence Research and Education Medicine, or TCAIREM, and the Associate Director of Education and Training at the University of Toronto's Data Science Initiative. And I'll let her talk.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. And I'm just going to share my screen. And Abby's not just introducing me, but actually co-leads the education group at T-CAIREM, so a very essential part of our education team. So thank you very much for the introduction. I also want to say that the Toronto Blue Jays are going to the World Series. It's October 2025. They have not been to the World Series since 1993. Some of you may not have been born. So this is a very exciting moment. I know we're connecting virtually and there's people here from all over the world, but Toronto's in a pretty good mood today. So I just want to mention that before I go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to talk about education and AI in medical education, and specifically focus in on this amazing group that we have the pleasure of helping lead at T-CAIREM called the International AI and Medicine Education Group. Before I do that, I'm going to give a little bit of context. T-CAIREM is 5 years old, and we started our education group with a few initiatives. I'm going to just reflect where we've been from that experience, because that really is what gave rise to this international group, and then talk a little bit about where we're going. For me, education is about changing the future for generations. So I'm a researcher, I'm an academic, I love working in the space of AI and healthcare, but at the same time, changing the way people think and learn about AI and integrate it into their clinical work, into the healthcare system, thing that has a really long last. So it's passion work for me, and then for many of us that work on the T-CAIREM team in the education group. So I'm going to just frame a little bit of kind of how we started when T-CAIREM started this journey, which is there was these different axes. And I would say that people existed in these different areas. There were extremes, but most people were kind of in one of these quadrants. So there was a lot of what I'm going to call cautious realism versus calling it skepticism, which sounds very negative. And it's just sort of, what is this? Is this actually changing anything? Do we need to, change our curriculum? How much do we actually need to think about training clinicians initially, which was the focus in the area of artificial intelligence? And then there were individuals who were just super excited. AI was the solution to all of our problems, is maybe still, and we need to just go full steam ahead. And then there's another axis which intersects, which is a little bit on the readiness resistance side, which is, are we actually ready to take this on? And how ready do we need to make clinicians or other people working in the health system for AI? And then a bit of resistance. There's a lot of things that go into being a clinician. There's a lot of expertise that's needed. There's a lot of moving parts in a health system. There's a lot of people aside from clinicians that interact with health systems. So there's always a bit of resistance when you have that much change happening this quickly, which is certainly the situation with AI. So for those of us that are really passionate about education, that's really our job, is to navigate this space in between all these domains. And I think we've tried to strike this balance, and to me, we resolve these tensions through education. So this is why education is so important. And this is why it's something that all of us should be interested in. Even if you're not thinking that you're an educator, you probably are if you're working in the space of AI, because it's so cutting edge. And so this is sort of, for us, the way that we resolve tensions. So I'm going to just, before I go into the International Medical Education Working Group, I'm going to just go back and just talk a little bit how we've built an ecosystem for education at T-CAIREM. And so you heard a little bit about who we are in the introduction. Of course, many of you have been and part of many T-CAIREM initiatives. And we had set out under the direction of Dr. Mohammed Mandami, who's our director, to transform health through AI, which is about advancing research, education, knowledge dissemination, and infrastructure through an engaged community. And we have lots of different groups. We have a really strong research lead, we have community engagement, we have data infrastructure, and then there's our team with the support of many on the T-CAIREM staff that lead the education piece. So you've already met Abby. I also want to acknowledge Gemma Apostle, who's an MD PhD student, also very highly engaged. And we have many actually learners engaged through our process, which has been really, really important. So when we set out 5 years ago to sort of tackle how we're going to advance education, you have to think back to the time there was very little around education. There were a lot of unknowns. The technology was still developing in many ways in terms of its readiness for clinical integration. We had lots of really interesting theoretical advances, lots of interesting applied AI work showing the potential, but the actual integration into health systems was pretty low at that point. Adoption, even now in 2025, is still relatively low in healthcare. But right away, we sat down and we said, there's different audiences. If we're thinking about educating AI for clinicians or for people working in the health system, that we need to think about. So one is that technical expert. So this is the individual that's going to be innovating. They're developing the latest AI technology. They're deploying it. They're doing real world evaluations. They're solving those hard problems. And that, I would say, we have a large number of these individuals in the University of Toronto community. We're actually very, very rich in AI innovation, very, exceptional in health research globally. And so that combination actually makes for a lot of innovation that's happening right here in Toronto. But those individuals, for the most part, are bought in. They have some kind of background. They're coming to the table at a much different level than the group that might be an applied clinical user. So this is an individual that's training to work in a health system. They're definitely going to come across AI. Maybe they even have to use it directly, but they're not developing AI. not researching AI, but they need to have certain skills to be able to use AI responsibly. And then there's the whole application of AI. And this could be legal, privacy, ethics, equity, all the important pieces on how we ensure this AI is deployed responsibly. And so we thought about these different audiences as we put together our initiatives. And I'll just quickly kind of set the stage of the initiatives that we have going on still, many of them, and what kind of led us up to this point. So we had sort of experiential programs in our summer student program. I'll go through these. We had trainee rounds. We had broader speaker series. We did do formal education support, both in postgrad and undergraduate medical education. And we've developed a resource hub. So the first kind of outreach was really about getting world-renowned researchers in AI and medicine and getting them interacting with our community. This is just a few examples of some of the talks. Some individuals came in person, met with students and other faculty here at the university. So you can think of this sort of education layer as what I kind of call awareness. You're getting sort of a short snippet of a very, well-respected expert in the field, and we're sort of opening up our minds to what's possible, what's at the cutting edge, what are the latest developments. And this certainly serves a really important purpose and has a wide reach. Our summer research program is something that's very popular, and it's grown considerably since we started. This is where we have undergraduate students and undergraduate medical students come and do summer projects in AI and medicine. And they come from across the country, and it's been outstanding. Just being there in the first one that we launched to now, the quality of the projects, what the level of sophistication of the AI projects that are being achieved in the summer by these students is out of this world. And so that's just a reflection of how much ability there is in these young undergraduate students that's sort of coming through. And those are all individuals, some of which are going directly into medicine as a clinician, some working in the health system in another way. So we're starting to see this influx of, real experts with experiential learning coming into the system. We also likewise profile some of our trainees, again, doing cutting edge AI applications in healthcare and, very, very high quality. It's a trainee round, but I would argue some of the best talks that you would see at any AI and medicine conference are happening by our trainees in our own ecosystem. And there's a lot of free education out there. And that's actually one of the challenges we have to deal with. If you're interested in formalizing education in AI and medicine, there's a lot out there. The challenge is there's a lot of noise, and it's at all different levels. It's not really organized. And so you can spend a lot of time doing a lot of free online courses, but actually not come out with a comprehensive learning on the other side of it, and actually could spend a lot of time. So we took this on as a challenge to try and organize what we deem as the most important and helpful, openly and freely available education resources, and organizing them for our audience, which we know are really interested in that applied application of AI in a healthcare context. This is, again, examples of some of our amazing education group and our learner co-leads. So we started to go in more formally, and this in academic half days for postgraduate medicine. So we go to different residency programs. We try to fit into programming that was already happening, which is why we went into academic half days, and continuously improved what we were teaching, tried to tailor it to different program areas. Learned a lot through this process, but this is sort of stepping our way into more of the formal education. And we received a lot of great feedback on that. We also realized about halfway through that we need to start earlier. So we have high school oriented training sessions. And again, this is really critical because not just for individuals coming through who are going to be AI innovators in healthcare or going to be doctors who use AI, but just the amount of AI that's part of everyday life, being a critical user of AI. And so we've been able to support some high school development in applications to AI in healthcare that are really, really popular, both here in Ontario as well as in PEI. We've done a session there as well. And then finally, from in our early days, we supported some advancements of improving the AI curriculum in undergraduate medicine at U of T. And so this is something I'm going to talk about this quite a bit more. That's a real work in progress in terms of what's happening around the world. People are trying to figure out how much, what's the right level. And this is something that our international working group took on. But basically, started with there was nothing, as there wasn't in most curriculums across the world, to started bringing in a self-learning module to help people understand the concepts, a lecture by a clinician AI expert in our ecosystem, Dr. Devin Singh would give that lecture, very popular lecture it was in the second year, and we moved to the first year medical students. And then tutorials led by T-CAIREM members, all who were identified as working in AI in medicine. So there was an opportunity for small sort of case study-like sessions with individuals that were actually developing AI that was being deployed in clinical settings, or actually using it or evaluating its use in clinical settings, so that trainees could actually get a sense of how does this actually work and what goes into it's not just about training an algorithm, like what goes into actually putting something like this into practice, and also looking at the very different use cases of AI. So what have we learned from these 5 years? And this is important because this is what led into our international medical education working group, which is really about the importance of what we were doing in developing future-ready clinicians. So we were really filling a gap that existed because the demand is there, the technology is changing and increasing every day. It's more and more in the purview. We're actually having people come into medical school and other health professional schools now with backgrounds in AI, computer science, engineering, more and more than we ever have in history. There's a literacy there that didn't exist, let's say 10 or 15 years ago. And I mentioned we're even talking to high school students. We're doing coding with these students. They're actually learning what deployment means and all these really important concepts of AI. So the actual appetite for more deep understanding of this is there. But and really we it's our responsibility to fill that role about developing future-ready clinicians that can interpret and question AI outputs. It's really important. I'll go into this in a bit more detail. There's all kinds of ethics and bias and context issues that are very serious, especially in the healthcare context, that we cannot gloss over. And the idea that those working in the health system are actually actively involved in creating and evaluating how AI integrates into clinical workflows and into practice. We also got that experience in those range of contexts. So as I mentioned, high school, undergraduate medical education, undergraduate health sciences, engineering, computer sciences, postgrad, and then our continuing medical education in the form of our speaker series and some of our other workshops, our conference as well, which I'll mention at the end. The other piece is that this is a very multidisciplinary space. So the advantage of all of our education experiences up to now, we had the best experience when we had different disciplines at the table. So clinicians, computer scientists, ethicists, engineers, lawyers, all of our programs, you see these mix of disciplines at the table. And it's not typically how we do education. We're very disciplinarily siloed. So we're kind of looking, okay, you're in medical education, you learn this. You're in engineering, you learn this. And so as much as possible, where we mix those, that's really where we see the biggest growth and saw the biggest impact. And then finally, this idea of experiencing AI is actually really key. So I've mentioned a few times the success of our summer undergraduate program. I think the key part of it is that these students really went in and they struggled with data access and deployment and models, data set drift and ethical issues and questioning how this will fit into a workflow. That's actually where we need the most people working. That's the toughest part of AI integration in medicine. And you only get that through experience. And so trying to integrate those experiences is really key. So with that, I'll mention just a couple slides on what's happening around the world and then how we got into the International Medical Education Working Group. So I sort of mentioned what we were doing at T-CAIREM and what happened in our medical school. And really, this has been happening all over the world. Many medical schools globally are now embedding AI across their curricula, mostly focusing on clinical use and decision support, some a bit more technical. There was a recent estimate from AAMC showing about over 70% of medical schools globally were reporting integrating AI content. So this is not just a couple elite schools adding it in. Every school, most schools, one way or another, are doing so. I will say that for the most part, though, it's very heterogeneous. It's typically a short module, anything as small as a lecture. Some have certificates that you can add on. We have something like that here. There's some more intensive, but they're mostly elective. Very few have mandatory. There are some exceptions globally, but that's sort of just where we're at this moment. So there are dedicated programs now, academic programs now emerging. UCL has a master's in AI and medical imaging. There's a master's of AI and computing and medicine. There's these types of programs popping up here and there, again, fairly inconsistent. And then several countries are actually trying to develop formal competencies. So for those of you that know how education works, formal academic education, it's really competency based. And we have different organizations, AAMC in the US, in Canada, the Royal College is supporting AI integration into CanMeds, lots of different task forces doing this type of work. So we're really starting to see that shift from, it might be interesting to include some of this in, to actually formalizing it in the form of competencies. There's also just globally another sort of undercurrent, which I just want to raise, which is all the strains happening on the healthcare system. So there's implications for workforce. This is a very interesting report from OECD who puts out a lot of really interesting papers around AI in medicine, different aspects of it. And it was just interesting for them to specifically call out the workforce challenges we're having around the world in healthcare right now, and how AI can play a really important role in the workforce challenges. And this is sort of my opinion on things, on where we're going. Obviously, healthcare systems are being challenged in lots of different ways, which I'm not going to go into around the world. And we're sort of, for me, there's a fork in the road that I'm seeing happening. And there's sort of what I'm going to call helpful adoption of AI tools, things like scribes, triaging. Basically, we still have the same system. Maybe we're making it incrementally better with AI. And then there's those that are really being ambitious in terms of reorienting a system that's more proactive, that's much more anticipatory, that's addressing equity issues, that's addressing our integration challenges, that's trying to get our capacity challenges. And so there's a couple countries that are really seeing AI as that opportunity to reimagine healthcare. And then you can see accordingly, the education efforts are significantly higher in those countries. They're more likely to be mandatory, and there are many, many more hours spent on that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the International AI Medicine Education Working Group. With all that context, to tell you a little bit about our way of trying to contribute to the education ecosystem of AI in medicine, at least in Toronto and in Canada, we knew through our networks that there were many, many others doing the same thing. And there's a lot of fantastic organizations focused at the intersection of AI and healthcare around the world. And there's lots of interesting research collaborations happening. But the one thing that all of these centers have in common is this desire to make sure that we're providing that high quality education. Again, education being the source of resolving tensions. It's the source of responsible AI, or a key part of it in my point of view. And so what can we do? Can we come together around education to actually provide some resources and share best practices? So we're a consortium of representatives from universities and healthcare centers around the world. And we all have this common desire to advance AI education in medicine as a part of our component of advancing AI in medicine. And we also were sort of committed to creating outputs and products that are widely available, freely accessible, and sort of a starting point for how people can think about these initiatives. There are many individuals involved, and we're also supported by the Alliance of Centers in AI and Medicine, a CAIREM, and the pediatric equivalent of that. But you can see here, we have representatives from all of these different institutions, and a really nice global perspective. I'll say that every time we get on these calls, I learned something. I think everybody learned something. There's so much happening in all these places. There's slightly different perspectives. Some people are further ahead on some aspects, but not others. And so it's really us coming together to advance this work. And in our first year of sort of really getting up and running and making sure that we were productive, we focused on two areas. And we had lots of ideas, and we still have lots of ideas. And I think Marianne can put the link in the chat to our group. But we focused specifically on these two areas, and I'll mention why we did. So first was a living glossary for AI in medicine. And then there was a global framework for AI curriculum in medicine, which I'm going to go through in quite a bit of detail. So the reason why we focused on a glossary as the first part is to address what we were, we spent our first sort of meeting talking about, what are the challenges? What are you experiencing at your institution? And this was something that seemed, very straightforward when you think about it, but actually very, very helpful. This idea that clinicians and educators and learners can start speaking the same language. Because for those of you that are new to the space, you do know that there's a sort of language issue right off the bat, especially when people are coming from different backgrounds. And we also wanted to make sure that this glossary was living. And so what living meant was that it's openly accessible, it's globally informed, and we invite feedback. So the version that you're seeing today may not be the version that you see tomorrow, but we're being very open about the ability to update these terms and have that conversation on what these terms actually are. It's just a way for everyone to get started. And I will acknowledge Orest Boyko, who's one of the members of the International Working Group, had a very initial version of a glossary that he had started and had been very useful as he had been advancing some education initiatives in his institution. So this was an opportunity for us to really take it and really expand it. And everybody was involved. Everybody got terms assigned to them that they had to review and respond. And we went through several cycles adding terms. And as mentioned, it's still living. And if you have ideas and want to add terms or give feedback, you're welcome to do so. And right now it's a static version, but we're turning it into an active version that will be much more interactive, that will be embedded in our resources hub. So that's our starting point to make sure that a conversation can be made. Our next area of focus was our framework for medical education. This is what I'm going to spend most of the time focusing on for the rest of the talk. And the purpose here was to move from terminology or elements of what we should teach into a somewhat more structured curriculum and really create that roadmap to readiness. So there are people on our call that are just starting this journey at their institutions, and though some that are very advanced, they have specialized programs, and we wanted to make sure there was a level playing field. The other thing we realized for all of us that were starting to advance this work in different ways is that we were kind of all just going along with what we thought was, the most important things. And we weren't really stopping to say, really, what should we be teaching and why? And so we did that hard work through a lot of deliberation and, again, international perspectives. There were some clear cross-cutting principles that kept emerging. And we wrote something general enough that it can be adapted. So people can take the framework, adapt it however they like, maybe take pieces of it, think about how they're integrating it into training. But essentially, it's covering not just foundational, but interpretive, responsibility aspects and leadership aspects, and being as comprehensive as possible. So this is the link, the actual framework that we published, and you have the link and you can access it yourself. I'm going to go through each of the sections and just give you a little bit of insight of how we got where we did, because I think you can look at this and say, okay, it makes sense. But actually, when you start looking at the way this is being covered in lots of different sections, it's usually missing a piece. And in fact, we started off with, I think, just 4 sections, 3 or 4 sections, ended up going to 7 through lots of deliberation and engagement. And I'll walk you through why we added some of the things we did. And we also ensured that we have learning objectives embedded in each. Again, the idea that if you want to take this, add it, adjust it, build upon it, use it to build curriculum, that the learning objectives really enables that, as well as the rationale for each of these pieces and a description. So I'm going to go through each of the pieces and tell you a little bit about our discussions with our international group of how we got to these, so you can understand the rationale of the different elements of the framework. So the first part is fundamentals, and this is the one that you'll see most commonly covered. If anyone's saying, well, we're covering AI in a medicine or a healthcare context, there will be some fundamentals identified there. And this is, defining what AI is, its main branches, showing how AI can be addressing clinical problems, some key aspects of how a model is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So around model evaluation, validation, some of the key metrics. So this is what would typically be in sort of like an introduction to machine learning for health course, let's say. And so you might spend, a whole semester doing a course on this, and you'll actually learn the elements. So obviously this could be stretched out or not stretched out. What I'll say is we definitely know this is important. No one's going to argue that we shouldn't ever cover fundamentals, but we also definitely know that it's not enough. It's necessary, but not sufficient. And I think that somewhere along the way, we kind of get lost in, well, we have to teach, everyone needs to know how to code. Everyone needs to know how to validate models. We need to know how the architecture of LLMs work. And all of that's really important, but that's not what's going to make a future ready clinician in and of itself. So we said, what else do we need aside from fundamentals? And again, I'm not presenting all the learning objectives because we'll be here for far too long, but you can have a look at what the learning objectives are included. I will show a couple of some of the later ones. So we next moved into quality of evidence. And again, an essential skill of working in a healthcare context, applying AI, one of the principles of medicine and what we do in healthcare is that we have good quality evidence for what we're doing. And so how do we think about evidence in the context of AI? Should you use an AI tool in that clinical context should be based on some kind of evidence. And we do teach evidence-based thinking, of course, in medicine. We do teach about how to generate evidence. Health research obviously does a lot of evidence building for interventions, for treatments, but it's a little bit different with AI. So there are aspects of deploying AI that are really amenable to concepts we're familiar with. So, for example, randomized trials or really well done observational studies. But the idea that when we're implementing this technology, that we actually want to test the impact in a very rigorous way on specific outcomes, like patient outcomes, maybe also physician outcomes, time, things like that. And the idea that we're using very rigorous processes, either through design, randomization, really rigorous, target trial frameworks, or through some kind of prospective evaluation. And so the idea that, when an algorithm is being tested, the idea of silent deployment, which isn't really talked about, in other contexts of evaluating and generating medical evidence, and then prospectively evaluating. And when we think about when we started in 2020, there weren't a lot of prospective evaluations of AI in healthcare, very few. Now I see about one a week that's really well done. And that's a dramatic change from where we were even a couple of years ago. We are seeing trials now. We are seeing real world deployments and really rigorous prospective studies. And what we want those that are working in a healthcare context with AI to actually have the skills to be able to actually critically assess the validity of that tool, the reliability, the applicability, the foundation for healthcare practice. So that's what we mean by sort of making sure we have critical appraisal. And I just want to shout out that there's a lot of work in this area. So we have a Made in Toronto tool by Dr. Kwong and colleagues that really is a critical appraisal tool for the evaluation of AI studies and clinical decision support. We have now Tripod AI. Tripod is the gold standard evidence reporting for predictive models. So there's now been an enhancement for when those models are AI based. These are examples of the type of rigor that we need when we actually evaluate the impact of AI for outcomes, and then that should feed into the decisions of whether we're using them and how in the health system. There's tons of reporting guidelines, by the way, for different types of AI studies. If you're not familiar with this area, and anyone working in health systems should be aware that there actually are standards, and there are guidelines, and there are processes that ensure that anything that they come into encounter in a healthcare environment should have gone through some sort of rigorous assessment, given these standards now exist. Again, did not exist a few years ago, many of them, but many of them now are, which is very good. Okay, so now we move into the third section of our framework, which is about responsible healthcare AI. So I know that many of you have been thinking, how did you get this far without saying this? Of course, AI has tremendous potential. It also has risks, and there are some very clear guardrails we need to put in place to make sure we are using this technology in a fair way, that there's accountability, there's full transparency. Privacy is preserved, of course, because this is often involving personal health information. We're mitigating bias. We're addressing issues around black box and explainability, that there's adverse reporting, for example. All these things that are essential to trust. And without trust and responsibility, then we don't have AI in healthcare. And so this is also obviously a very big topic, but really one that's important that we reflect on the great work that's already happened. And again, I keep saying this, if I think back to 5 and 10 years ago, we had lots of notions of worry, but now we have very good guidance. We have frameworks. we're seeing how those frameworks are being operationalized, like future AI, the different AI acts that are popping up around the world. Canada doesn't have one just yet, and how they're being operationalized in a healthcare context. But all to say that we actually have a lot that we can build upon, and we can train in terms of what does responsible healthcare AI actually look like. And just to say that there are two sides of a coin on this for me. So there's the whole piece on regulation, guidelines, and standards. Obviously, we can't make everyone an expert, but people should know like what's in the realm of regulation, what's not. And we should also be embedding from day one that one of the best ways to have responsible AI is actually to engage with patients, engage with practitioners, like frontline providers that are actually using this technology. And that it's actually both these things that are actually a core part of responsible AI. And I love a Swiss cheese model analogy because I think it works in so many contexts. That's definitely how I think of responsible AI. So we can't just say, well, okay, you should know that there's regulations. That's maybe going to stop some things. There's most hospitals have their own institutional policies. They have AI governance in place. There's chief AI officers. This is what's happening in all healthcare institutions around the world. And of course, it's empowering every individual to question and to be able to understand how to responsibly use AI in context. So then we get to our fourth part of our framework, which is deployment, post-deployment monitoring, evaluation, and oversight. So this is all about what happens after the model's developed. And again, this is where a lot of AI in healthcare struggles. We have come a long way with some of those standards and actually making sure that we have reducing bias, we have good data, good model building practices, but that's only part of it. And I mentioned already regulatory ethics and governance. What happens once the model's in that very messy real world environment? How is it being integrated into workflows? What does real world testing look like? This relates to evidence. And then how is monitoring happening? Everyone that works in healthcare should understand that a post-deployment monitoring system should be in place. When there's 1, 2, 3 algorithms running, this might be easy to get a handle on when you know it's not working. What about when there's 60, 70, 100 algorithms running? This is the reality in a lot of the hospitals that are most advanced on the AI application journey. And again, this is a critical part of education because as a clinician working and using AI, you want to be rest assured it's not just you using the tool, that there's actually systems intentionally built in place for that monitoring and updating to be occurring. And I think this is what we're seeing a lot of now in AI and medicine, where we're spending a lot of time. We're realizing we need a lot of effort. We also need a lot of people working in this space. Leadership and change management. So this is something that came out of our discussions, which is very strongly. And it comes out of people working in healthcare institutions, really trying to advance AI, saying, all this is great. We have very high quality evidence. We have really strong, governance, ethics, equity assessments, feeling really good about the integrity of that AI technology. And then they realize that this is actually a big change management journey. And it's not a small one because we're changing things. We're changing professional identity. We're changing autonomy. We're changing workflow. We're managing some of those tensions I showed at the beginning. It's actually really important. And the places that have been able to advance the most really take this on in the beginning. Again, it's not that this is something that probably needs multiple levels of training, but the idea that this doesn't just happen. Just because the tool works better doesn't mean it's going to get integrated. Just because a treatment is better doesn't mean it's going to get used. There's a whole piece around it. And this is kind of a diagram I've put together to say, if you're really thinking about advancing AI in your institution, there's all these things. And you see how leadership and oversight is really critical. It can't just be one champion trying to advance their AI application. There's human AI, there's workforce building, there's who's liable, where's oversight. What about we haven't talked about the deployment infrastructure. There's a lot of leadership and change management involved. And so this one, I did put the learning objectives up just so you can have a sense. What are developing leadership skills to drive AI adoption, leading from ideation to implementation, addressing cultural and structural barriers. So that's what this whole section of the curriculum is really focused on. And as I mentioned before, this is another sort of like necessary but not sufficient, but it's absolutely necessary. And this is where we see the most barriers to adoption, which is why it came up so heavily in our discussion. Last section, second last, but last sort of substantive section is about future trends. And again, this is something that came through very strongly from our working group, which was about saying, okay, great, this technology is changing all the time. Now we have quantum, now we have synthetic data, now we have federated learning, now we have all of, agentic AI, all of these new technologies happening, changing. And so how do we build ourselves so that we're ready for this continuous learning and updating? And this is things like, how do you foster a culture of creativity and experimentation while maintaining quality and safety? This is really hard for health systems. Obviously, in other health and other sectors, this is a little bit different. But, most of us that work in healthcare settings, we need to maintain a very safe, high quality environment while also embracing this technology that's coming. How do we avoid superficial adoption? How do we build the case for what actually makes a difference versus not in this innovation? How do you know when to say no? Not every shiny new technology is actually worth us spending our time on. So these are the types of questions that our working group actually really pushed us to include in the curriculum. And at first I thought, well, is this the place for it? But I now see how important it is to actually seed some of that thinking early on. And then lastly, of course, case studies, which shouldn't need any justification. We know that case studies are really important to learning, but really, I want to emphasize this is about successes and failures. And there's been some failures and there will be more. And how can we actually learn from some of the real world implementation? And we've done this with the undergraduate medical students at U of T by setting up those sessions with T-CAIREM members that are actually trying to do this work. And you can see a lot of learning here, and you really start to understand that human machine interaction piece in great detail. So that sort of summarizes our framework. What I'll say, our key takeaways through this process which was really amazing, is that, would have been very easily for a few of us to sit down and just talk about like fundamentals, maybe some responsible AI piece and think that we're done. But this idea of going from fundamentals to quality of evidence to responsible AI to deployment to leadership and being future ready is really the comprehensive curriculum that we think will take us and resolve all those tensions from this idea of, maybe adopting it in a few ways to actually thinking about a transformational health system that's AI enabled. Just quickly before I stop for questions and comments, I'll mention that there's been others that have looked at different components of what should be in AI in medicine education. This is a group that did a Delphi study in Canada, and the results of their Delphi is here, and there's some synergies with what we found as well. So the idea that you want to cover some fundamentals and ethics, and bringing up some pieces around partnering and communication. So some of those elements resonated in our framework. This is another one specifically for family medicine and kind of aligned to CanMed roles of communicator, collaborator, and getting into this idea of overview, ethical, legal, application, and application particular context, in this case, family medicine. We expanded on this quite a bit. I quite like that they refer to the quintuple aim as the outcomes here. And this is another example of a framework, and thinking a little bit, again, technical, ethical, clinical applications, some continuous feedback, and then some of the ways that this can be done. So reflected in some of the things that we found in ours, I think with ours, we definitely were significantly comprehensive and really thinking about how we move, again, from just let's make sure people know about AI to how can we actually think about a transformed system with AI. So I'll close a little bit on thinking through what's next. So first, I want to, before talking about what we're thinking of in our specific working group, just flag a couple challenges, which I know some of you might be thinking, and certainly we're thinking about it. Curriculum overload. So there's only so much we can fit into our formal training programs. This can't be done in, there needs to be thoughts about the range of ways this education gets delivered, not just what happens in the classroom. And also, we probably need to rethink how we're spending our time and what things need to come out or need to be done a different way. So I've heard that a lot from trainees, actually, about some of that reimagination of what's in the curriculum. And that's hard work and it takes time. So just to flag that we were very aware of that. We talk about that quite a bit. How we bridge disciplines. And that's always a challenge, just the way that we think about our siloed education structures. And then that keeping pace with change. You can be quite sure that whatever you're teaching, I teach in the area of AI and health, whatever I teach 1 year is not what I teach the following year, makes it pretty challenging to keep up. And keeping pace with change is just a reality at where we are in the technology. So for our working group, what are we thinking about? So we're really thinking about capacity building in lots of different ways. So how can we take what we've created and actually think about delivering some of this content in ways that's freely accessible, giving people tools and resources to deliver this content? We think we can have a big impact that way. We've also had a lot of requests and interest to expand to all health professionals, and I think that that's a really exciting area. We think this is very thorough and comprehensive, but of course we need to start evaluating the delivery of these educational initiatives, as well as formalizing those competencies, which is work that's well underway, but just to flag that. And then I can't tell you how important it's been to do this work globally. Definitely, we have a lot of really smart people here in Toronto and very thoughtful people. But the questions that we get when we come together as a global group are so much richer, and what we produce is so much more applicable to lots of different contexts. And so that's been really important, and we're going to focus on that. Okay. The other thing is I did not have time, and I will not talk about, this is my second last slide, actually using AI in education. So there's all kinds of ways that AI is being used for precision learning in our simulations, lots of different AI-assisted technology. It's sort of another scope, but I want to mention that work is happening and important. So I'll end by just saying that I think the fact that we have tensions in this space is a very good thing, and that to me, they're a signal of progress if we can actually think, I try to, in my mind, think about each of these extremes of these quadrants anytime I approach something, to make sure that we're being balanced in how we're approaching it. And that actually doing this work in education has been a really key bridge to all of this and the path forward. And I'm always happy to know that this work will live well beyond my role as a researcher or someone working in the health system, because of the capacity we're building throughout from high school all the way to those working in the system. So I'll stop there for any questions. I see there's a couple, and I just want to leave this slide up to say that we have an amazing conference coming up that you heard about. So I'll end it on this slide.
Thank you, Dr. Rosella, for the talk, and thank you, attendees, for the questions. So the first question from Jason Krikovic, asking about what KPIs are you using to track success of these programs, essentially.
Yeah, so right now we have not done that work yet. So right now we're really at the stage where we just want to formalize what everyone's doing and put it in a framework so that we could kind of organize, because everybody was doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But as we've talked more, as I mentioned at the end, as evaluation is becoming sort of the key thing that we need to do next to build the evidence on the education side, that's something that we'll be thinking about. Certainly, we've done some assessments like on people's self-rated assessments of how they feel they've learned. But I think we want a KPI that's much more about AI adoption in the health system to really show success. So that's kind of where we're thinking about that. Yeah, and then you mentioned the AI literacy scales. That's sort of where we were. We've done with the little bit of evaluation that we've done. But I would like to see something around implementation and adoption to really show success.
And then the next question was about barriers to high school students who might not have financial means, and potential exclusion of people who may be impacted by bias and historical disparities in health.
Yeah. So we just started our high school programming a couple years ago, and I will say that we did think about that, and we do make spaces available for any students that aren't able to pay for whatever reason. So that's something that we're strongly encouraging, and making this type of education and training freely available. Some of it's online, so that helps with some of the accessibility issues. And then I think we have some in-person sessions, but it's a really important point. And I think that this is why, again, this is where education is really critical. The more that we can share our education initiatives with a broader group, the better. And it's a key part of getting underrepresented groups engaged. So something that we've been thinking of, and we'll keep thinking about it for sure.
And then Dr. Ian Poon has shared some seminars and LLMs that are really
Great.
useful. Daisy Dulay has asked about the diversity of the membership of the AI medical education. So any specialists in implementation science and QI, are there any patient partners involved at the level?
Yeah, great question. So, and thanks, Ian, for those tips. I need to just say there's amazing work being done by so many. And so the community of practice around some of these implementation are amazing. So thank you for sharing and sharing that knowledge with everyone. In terms of the membership of AI in medical education, I think it's our working group anyway has people from all different backgrounds, all different disciplines. I think we have a good representation, but it's a volunteer group where sort of those that are really interested are coming together. So I think that, and we've definitely talked about having more outreach and efforts to make sure that we have more global representation. There are lots of efforts on patient engagement. So our group in particular isn't focusing on that for the medical education group, but we have lots of members of T-CAIREM that do AI engagement work. I also do some research work in this area where we're actually working with community and patient partners to co-design AI tools that are being deployed. So there's lots of work happening, I'm going to say, around the network. It's not something we've specifically thought of for this education group. I also lead a national network on AI for public health education, and we do have a community advisory group for all of our education on that group. It's an excellent point, and I think getting engagement not just into the developing of the AI, but actually how we're teaching AI is very powerful. And we have a lot of great patient representations always at our T-CAIREM conference, and we will this year as well. So thank you for bringing up the point. And I think we're at time. Unfortunately, but I see these amazing questions. Please feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the T-CAIREM team if you're interested in contributing to this group, if you want to hear more there are lots of us that would love to talk to you about this, and not just myself, but actually any member of our working group or our T-CAIREM education team.
Great. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this talk, and especially Dr. Rosella for sharing her insights and experiences. I also want to remind everyone, as we see on the screen, the 2025 T-CAIREM conference is taking place on November 14th here in Toronto. And we have some really exciting keynote speakers, debates, panels, Shark Tank competition for health tech startups, and research presentations. And more details are on our website, tcairem.utoronto.ca. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Go Jays.